Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom, or good afternoon and Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning. I'm joined this morning by my dear friend, Rabbi Marc Gellman of South Florida. Marc, good morning.
Good morning, Ed.
Good
Good Shabbos,
Shabbos, good
everybody.
Shabbos. Good to see you. This morning, we turn a page in the Torah. We turn a page from the book of Exodus to the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Leviticus because it's Torah HaLeviim, the rules of the Levites, the priestly and servant class of the ancient Jewish people. And the entire book, with this exception of just two very short sections, the entire book are laws of purity, sacrifice, and offerings that the ancient Israelites were to make in the newly constructed Mishkan and eventually in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. We have been reading two books, Genesis and Exodus, which are narrative stories. They tell us who we are and where we come from, and they contain within them the core values of the Jewish people, our perceptions of the world and how we live in the world. This book is very different. This book has almost no narrative. It is all about law. The first thing to say about this book is that what's remarkable is its very presence in the canon, its very presence in the Torah. Because after all, what is this book? Well, I like to call it a tech manual. Every profession has a technical manual. When you bring your car to a mechanic for something that needs to get fixed, if the mechanic is not thoroughly familiar with your car, he or she will look up in a book published by a company called Chilton, by the way, the Chilton manual on my Toyota, or the Chilton manual on your Ford or your Chevy or your Hyundai or your Honda. And the Chilton manual has diagrams and charts and numbers to tell the mechanic how to fix your car and how to adjust it and how to get it running in the right way. When you go to a lawyer and you need a certain kind of document drafted, a pleading or a will or something, again, if the lawyer isn't completely familiar with that particular kind of document or that particular kind of legal procedure, he or she will look up in a manual how to do it. Bankers have manuals, doctors have manuals, diagnostic manuals, pharmacists have manuals. Here's a secret: rabbis have manuals. Now, the manual tells me how to do the ceremonies that I perform, how to do a wedding, what to say to bris, what to say to funeral. But what's characteristic of manuals is that a manual tells you how to do it. It doesn't tell you why, and it doesn't give you the broader context of what this means. That's why I went to rabbi school. Otherwise, anybody could buy a manual and pretend to be a rabbi. And fortunately, there are some people who do such, just like anybody could buy a manual and pretend to be a mechanic and try that too. But I went to school in order to learn the deep tradition. The manual is just a summary of the how-to. What we have in the Torah, in the book of Vayikra, is the professional manual of the ancient priests of Israel. Here's how you do it. At least in the first 18 chapters of the book of Leviticus. Here's how you offer this kind of sacrifice, and here's how you offer this kind of sacrifice, and here are the different options that you can do. So the important thing to recognize is that what's missing is all the why, because that's not what a manual does. That you have to read commentaries and deeper literature to find out. The second interesting thing is that sacrifice is one of those very rare human things that have to be done right. Right? There are certain things we do in the world, and there's a great deal of latitude for personal kinds of expression. You know, for dancers, for musicians, for artists of different kinds, for a poet, and in lots of other cases, an actor, for example, there's a lot of room for personal creativity. But when you go to a surgeon and you need a part of your body fixed, and this person is going to open you up, you want it done right. You don't want the guy getting too creative. I mean, creativity, of course, that's what makes what makes for virtuosity. But you want him to know how to do it and to do it right. And there's a very little tolerance for personal creativity in that place, right? There's a difference between, for example, ballet and modern dance. Ballet, there's some very, very strict rules about how you do it. Modern dance, you can do whatever you want. Same thing in literature. The difference between a sonnet, which has a particular poetic structure, and just free verse. however you feel like you want to write it. And artistic kind of stuff is the same way. Sacrifice was something that had to be done right. And so the manual, the tech manual of the priesthood was very important because it had to be done properly. It had to be done right. Now, here's the revolution, is that the tech manual was published for all of us. So we can see that the priest is a human being like us. The priest is not an angel. The priest is not godly. The priest is a human being who serves the community and serves God and brings our worship forward. And here are all the instructions on how to do it. And we now can peek into that tech manual and see what the priests know. But the big question remaining, now that the temple's gone since the 1st century, is what do we do with this? What does this mean? What does it mean that the Torah gives us page after page after page after page of rules for how to offer sacrifices, that sacrifice is a form of worship? Now, Marc, that's the question I'd like to explore today. What can we make of this? What can we do with this? How can we make this important again, rather than a time of the year when rabbis turn to book reviews or movie reviews or talking about Pesach shopping, which we will, of course. But how do we make this something important? What does sacrifice, korbanot, what does sacrifice mean to us now?
Right. That's such a wonderful question, and a deep one and a challenging one. And I've been thinking about it for a while, because the traditional interpretation of this week's Parsha by the rabbis was, all right, these were sacrifices done by priests who we didn't like that much, and in a temple which we didn't feel at all comfortable in. And we changed it. We changed every sacrifice into a prayer. So the mincha was a grain offering, one of the 5 offerings, burnt offerings, meal offerings, that's the mincha, peace offerings, guilt and shame offerings. And each one was different. Some, like the olah, it was a whole animal that was burned up. The priest didn't eat any of it, and it was a big time thing because it was expensive to donate a whole animal. The meal offering, the mincha, was one that poorer people could do because it was grain mixed with oil so it could burn. And then they would put frankincense in it so that it had a good smell. And those sacrifices and the meaning of them in Hebrew, korbanot, is something that to come close, to come closer to God. The fundamental thing about sacrifice that we have lost is its sacrificial nature, meaning a sacrifice isn't something where you're going to throw out some clothes. So, you know what, throw them into the Salvation Army collection bin. That's not really a sacrifice. It's okay, but it's not really a sacrifice. A sacrifice is giving something to God that will make a difference in your life and in the lives of others who benefit from your sacrifice. It's something that makes a difference. The rabbis trying their best, because let's not forget, Ed, what the rabbis were doing was inventing a new religion, is really what it was. I mean, they had the same holidays, but they were totally different. I mean, you had an inherited priesthood giving up to a meritocracy of rabbis. You had animal sacrifice giving up to prayer. The problem is that they don't translate. Prayer is not a replacement for animal sacrifice, because davening mincha doesn't, except if your every minute of the day has value to you, davening mincha takes a few minutes. That's not a sacrifice. If you want to look at the service, the prayer service, and ask what's sacrificial, it's listening to our sermons. That would be a sacrifice. But basically, the rabbis tried, but I think they got it wrong. Not that I want animal sacrifice back, but I want a thicker, richer, more transformative, yes, more costly interpretation of sacrifice. So for me, what's missing in modern Judaism is a viable notion of a sacrificial Judaism. So what is it that we could sacrifice in our world without a temple, without animals we want to kill for no reason? What is it that we can sacrifice for God? And I come up with my own little list. And that list includes things like time to study. You know, everyone's so busy. Actually, time is a big sacrifice for people. If you say, I'm not going to do this, that, and this, I'm not going to shop, I'm not going to go to a restaurant, I'm going to study something. And I'm going to take time out of my week, out of my day, hopefully, and I'm going to sacrifice time to learn something for God, meaning that I'll be a more literate Jewish person, a better person, not just Jewish. And that's one thing we can do, study. Another is time to read. People look at their computers and of course they read, but they're reading 2 sentences at a time. They're reading a paragraph at a time. Maybe there's a short essay that they got sent to them that's, 800 words. I'm talking about reading a deep, sustaining novel or a history book, which is what I read, or philosophy, something that requires commitment. Reading is a sacrifice. Time to serve others is a sacrifice. People I know, and you know, have put in their life regular times to work in soup kitchens. Regular times. They're volunteers and they go there and they serve food to what are called by the soup kitchens, and this is a very important thing, they're called clients. They're clients who come in, so that even in referring to them, you don't degrade them. But serving others so that you aren't just doing everything in the day to serve yourself. Time to think. This is a big thing for me because thinking is a big thing for me. I'm a philosopher, but that doesn't mean I'm a philosopher because I have a piece of paper like the Wizard of Oz that shows me I have the right to think. It's because thinking requires sustained intellectual commitment, thinking through ideas. When, for example, and this could help many of our viewers, when you get all upset about something in the news, one of the reasons you're getting upset is that you aren't thinking about it. You're just emotionally reacting to it. Well, how about thinking? How about thinking? And what was the last time you thought about, I wonder what my purpose here is in life? Or when was the last time you thought about, I wonder if death is really the end of me? Or when was the last time you thought about not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country? No.
Yeah, the philosophers call that contemplation.
Yes.
Contemplation is a special kind of thinking because it's sustained, it's disciplined. It's an activity. It's a thing to do, and it's one of the. I think it's a very interesting observation because it's one of the casualties of modernity.
No question.
Because
So go ahead, and then I'll come back to my list. But what are some things that you would?
No, I want to just complete this idea. You see, my great grandfather, had a long walk through the town to get to his work, so he had time to contemplate.
Yeah.
Right. Me, I sit on the freeway. You can't think about a damn thing except not getting killed. So what you're suggesting is taking time out of the flow of time to contemplate, which is thinking about, today we even denigrate that. We talk about Luftmensch, or daydreaming, but it's not daydreaming. It's actually a deep kind of thinking about who and what we are. Keep going with your list. Okay. I want to hear the rest of the list.
A couple more items.
No, I love it.
Time to write thank you notes. Now, this is a fountain pen.
Ooh.
It's a fountain pen. You open it up.
You got it for your bar mitzvah, right?
There's ink in this. And I have stationery. And I ask, and when I'm in the synagogue, I would ask parents when their kids started bar mitzvahs to get their kids stationery so that they could write thank you notes to people who would give them something. But when you write a thank you note to somebody, it's unbelievably more important. Now, even more so with electronic emails. Thanks for blah, 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 blah. 5 seconds of your life it took to write that note. And that's about how people see it. But if you write something in ink on paper that says, thank you for doing this and this and this, it's a big deal. Time to call someone far away. We're connected by email, but there's nothing like the sound of your voice. So I don't believe emails are a true replacement for a phone call any more than I believe that mincha is a true replacement for a sacrifice of grain. Call someone. Time to purge your stuff. This is a very good sacrifice for God. Cain and Abel, as I said, brought sacrifices right away. And it's clear that God favored Abel because he brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock, whereas Cain just brought stuff of the field, which is easy to interpret as Cain brought the rotted stuff that wasn't good for him anyway, and Abel brought stuff that was valuable to him, and he gave it to God. So the idea is to take some of your stuff, not just that you don't wear anymore, not that you don't use anymore, but stuff that you do use, but not that much. And even so, you could still give it away and have less stuff, which for most of us is a good move. Time to write a diary. When I teach people who are converting to Judaism, or anyone who just wants to study with me, I first have them start a diary where they write questions whenever they come up in the diary. And then when we meet, I say, so read me your questions from your diary. So we have a place to begin with what they want to know, not with what I want to teach them. And then finally, a time to say prayers that don't involve bakashot, that don't involve asking for anything more than you have. Prayers of thankfulness, primarily. You know, the Bishop of Meister Eckhart, the medieval Christian mystic, said, and I quote his teaching often, if the only prayer we ever say is thank you, it will be enough. So the idea to really be in touch with gratitude, thanking people for the things they've given you, being grateful, those are things, all these are just a small list that I made up of ways to be sacrificial. That's what I'm thinking.
I love the idea. And I'll tell you why, because I want to build around it a little bit of a theory, if that's okay.
Sure.
From the time of the earliest times of Jewish consciousness, up until the first century, we offered sacrifice. That was the principal way that Jews worship. We always prayed. I mean, prayers all over the Bible, for example, and certainly all over the later tradition. But sacrifice was the principal way that Jews engaged God and brought their thoughts before their Creator. And then when the temple was destroyed, as you said, the rabbis gave us prayer as a substitute or a temporary substitute, a placeholder. But the difference is so profound because prayer is, after all, a speech act, and speech comes very cheaply, very easily. And so the rabbis instituted an idea that prayer, tefillah, is the only mitzvah, the only commandment, the only religious thing we do that has to be accompanied by kavanah. So it's better if you give tzedakah with kavanah. It's better if you give charity with a full heart and a giving hand. But if you don't, even if you give it grudgingly, you fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah, right? It's better if you go visit your sick friend with a full heart full of love and compassion. But even if you go grudgingly, you still fulfill the mitzvah. But the only mitzvah that is disqualified if you just do it without feeling it is prayer, because prayer is all feeling, because there's no thing there besides what the words you bring. right? And the rabbis understood that, but that makes prayer a very peculiar act, because who can feel that all the time?
Yeah.
Who has that mood all the time? That mood is very, very hard to conjure certain times of the day, certain times of the week, certain times of your life, right? And the idea that you can somehow replace a physical gift of something, the act of bringing something, especially an animal, a living, breathing thing, and giving up the life of that animal, what you're really doing is giving up your own life. I mean, really, the psychological dynamic of sacrifice is we put you on the altar, and just before we chop your head off, we take the cow or the sheep and put them in your place. And you've been saved, but the life, it's the animal's life instead of your life. And the idea that somehow reciting Mincha Mariv is going to reciting words from the prayer book is going to replace that is very difficult. I think it's a very, very astute observation. I mean, the only analogy I could think of is like go tell your wife on her birthday that you didn't buy her a present, because there's no object in the world that could possibly capture your love and passion and commitment to her. Go tell her you're just going to spend an evening whispering sweet things in her ear. See what she does to you.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, I love my wife and she knows I love her and she likes to hear sweet things from me all the time. That's absolutely true. But if I forget to get her flowers or a gift on her birthday, because there's something about the object. Now, here's the object. That's very important. There's a very famous psychologist named D.W. Winnicott who comes up with this idea that, you know why little kids hang on to their banky, their blanket, or hang on to their teddy bear? Because as a little kid is going through life and going through all of the remarkable changes of human development, it's scary. You keep finding yourself in a new world. So you hold on to an object, which he called a transitional object, which carries my sense of being secure in the world with me. And that transitional object becomes sacred to that kid. That kid loses that teddy bear. That kid loses that banky, that blanket, Linus and Snoopy. That kid isn't himself, because the object carries so much more, we'll call it magical because it's deeply psychological, magical feeling of who I am and that I am safe and I am secure. And you can't just replace that with words. You can't just replace that with words. So I think you have something very powerful here, right?
I think so.
So what you're saying is, I'm looking for acts that reflect commitment. I put this, I'm looking for acts that reflect commitment, and I'm looking for an act that touches the deepest part of my own self. Here, I think I would evoke the philosophy of my teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, because he always believed that the closest place you can approach God is deep within, the God within, the godly within us. And what you're suggesting is that what worship ought to be is an act that engages the God within us, the best part of ourselves. If you want to use less religious language, I am a human being. I do all this stuff to reflect my being. I eat and sleep and exercise and take vitamins. When do I engage the human in me?
Right.
That part of my soul, that part of my being, which is the best part of me. And what sacrifice was supposed to be, and what you're suggesting and we ought to go back to, is a series of religious acts. They're religious because they're sacred. They have to be done properly, and they have to be done on time, and they have to be done regularly, that engage the human within me. The human within me. So exercise is great because it'll, strengthen your heart and lengthen your life and let you sleep better. That's important because that's the being, that's the body. But what about for the soul? What about for that part of me which is sensitive and compassionate and thoughtful, or should be? How do I engage that? And so you're suggesting that what we ought to do is create a catalog of mitzvot, of religious acts that we take on. And especially, and the other interesting thought is that the way the sacrifices work is you had certain sacrifices which were regular. There's a tamid. Every morning you offered this. So every morning there should be something you do which to remind you that this is who I am. I have friends who love to get up and and meditate for a half an hour. A person gets up and takes a walk, but takes a very particular kind of walk because he's looking for opportunities to say thank you for the gift of being alive. That's a tamid. But then there's other kinds of acts which reflect other kinds of moods, right? When I do something wrong or I suspect that I'm not right, an asham, a guilt offering, which says, I know I did this wrong. I know I'm better than this. So how do I relieve myself of the guilt, but really look deeply and find out why I did it, and engage the part of me which wants to be better, right? Go off and do one wonderful thing, right? And then this an offering of todah, of thank you, of gratitude for the gifts of life. And I think that what you've reflected is a series of real acts, real things, right? Moments of contemplation, moments of reflection, acts of giving to others, acts of giving to the world, which really ought to, which form worshipful moments.
Yeah.
Then you can.
Let me say this in the most simple way I can, which is a sacrifice has got to cost you something. If it really doesn't cost you anything, it isn't a sacrifice. And if you look at the great irony of sacrifice is that people think of it as, well, that's something that's hard to do. And if I do it, it's going to be an imposition on me. Instead of the opposite, which is the truth, that the only way for you to flourish as a human being is to have a sense of sacrifice built into your life. And in fact, if you look at the religions in the world that are the most vibrant at a time when religion is having a tough time, it's the religions which ask the most sacrifice, and cultures as well. For example, look at the Mormon year of service for their kids. That's a huge sacrifice that they all give in service to the church. And it's real. And Mormons are growing very quickly. They're growing exponentially, actually. And partly it's because they ask something. They ask something of you. I mean, Orthodoxy has its appeals and its difficulties, but certainly one of its appeals is that Jewish Orthodoxy asks something of you, something real. And if you look at Israel, you take kids who are 20 in America and kids who are 20 in Israel, they're totally different human beings. The people in Israel, the kids in Israel who are 20 are complex, grown human beings with interesting views about things. In America, these are mostly, there's a lot of them are kids living at home doing video games. And of course, that's not totally true either way, but there's a truth to this. And the truth is, it happens in Israel not because they're better kids, they aren't. It's that they have the army service. And the army service means you could die doing this, but it's to defend the country.
Right.
And I think, again, back to the speech, which still lives in my heart, Kennedy's inaugural, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I ask myself, what politician could give that speech today? And the answer is none of them on either side. It's a competition of who can give you more, who can give you more stuff from the government. No one has appealed to the sacrificial nature of patriotism and what it means. So I think that's a piece of it. And there's other things like adopting a rescue dog that people can do, which is a real sacrifice, because having a dog in your house is like having a 2-year-old human forever. It's just a tremendous burden. You can't go anywhere. You got to walk them and poop them and pick up their poop. And it's just, but these animals depend upon us, or they'll be euthanized, they'll be killed. And Tommy and I used to bless the North Shore Animal League buses who would go across the country to animal shelters, pick up animals, put them in cages in the bus, and then go to shopping malls and park the bus out there And it was a wonderful bus because they found that people would adopt animals if it was right near where they were shopping. And on the side of the bus was a cartoon painted by Patrick McDonnell, who draws the cartoon strip Mutts. And his 3-paneled bus cartoon strips, he draws a cat thinking. And the cat is thinking, in the first panel, the cat says, "I know what it's like to be alone in a cage, waiting for a kindness from a stranger." And then in the second panel, it says, "You wait and wait, hoping, praying, thinking. Life shouldn't be like this." And in the last panel, "You know you can do more. You know you can be more. You hold on to the dream. You just wish someday you could share it with someone."
That's beautiful. I would only just suggest a slight difference. Say, I don't think that sacrifice is something. I don't think the definition of sacrifice is necessarily that which costs. I think it's a matter of giving. It's fundamentally the difference between taking and giving.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And here I think that what you're talking about is it's something that reaches the deepest part of yourself. I think that last statement of the cartoon, you can be more,
Yes.
right? Sacrifice is an act in which you touch the part of yourself which knows you can be more.
Yeah, I
which
agree.
knows that you can grow.
What I was saying, though, Ed, was I was just trying to criticize.
No, I love it. I think it's very important.
What I would call trivial giving.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And they'll look.
Okay, here, take some of my old torn T-shirts. But that's not it.
Well, that too is important. But here again, I think your example of the Israeli kids is very important. First of all, because it's a sustained commitment. It's a commitment to something beyond myself, nation, peoplehood, the dream of Zionism, right? And the difference is between kids who are put into a circumstance where they spend 2-3 years giving of themselves, as opposed to American kids who spend the next 4 years in college basically indulging themselves. It's a very self-centered, college is a very self-centered kind of experience. And one of the things I've always told kids going off to college is that as soon as you get your classes, and as soon as you know what your schedule is going to be, go down into the town, wherever your college is, and find a place to volunteer. Yeah. Because you have to be giving back at the same time as you're taking in. And the transaction between all of that, your classes and courses and experiences on campus are going to give you, and you giving back. Go teach in an elementary school. Go work as a volunteer in the hospital. Go work in the food bank. Go work for the pet shelter, the animal shelter. Go give at the synagogue, but give of yourself at the same time as you're indulging yourself, and you'll find that your college experience is infinitely more valuable, more purposeful than just sitting on the campus and indulging yourself and stuffing yourself with full of knowledge and every other thing that's on a college campus. The other thing, Marc, I think, which is very important to notice both in the Torah today and in all the examples that you gave, is that this is done in a community. The Israeli kid who goes to the military, to the tzava, he's part of a community of commitment. There's a circle of other kids in his class who are going to the army. The army itself is a community, and the society itself supports this, right? The person who goes to work in the food bank or the animal shelter, the person who volunteers is part of a circle of others who are doing this. And so you feel like you're part of something bigger, and the community supports it. The community praises it, sustains it. And in a certain sense, the community expects of you, but it's a circle. It's not just you by yourself, standing all alone, trying to hold back the evil of the world. You feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, and that is an incredibly powerful experience.
Yeah,
right.
When I talk to kids who are depressed and, God forbid, thinking to hurt themselves, the first thing I do and try to get them to helpers, but the other is I take them to a food bank and I have them serve lunch to somebody. And it's almost an instantaneous transformation,
Right.
because their entire life is about themselves. It's all solipsistic. It's just me, 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 me. What do I need? And then I don't have any meaning. Well, of course you don't have any meaning, because it's all about you. You can't find meaning just in yourself. There's the rabbinic saying, which I love so much, O chevruta o matuta, give me community or give me death. And that's the truth of our species. It's the truth of religion. And to the degree that Judaism is weak right now, it's not because rabbis aren't good enough. You're good enough. I was marginal, but you were good enough. And it's still the reason that synagogues are in trouble is that we don't ask enough.
That's a wonderful observation. Yeah, and there's a beautiful teaching of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shnar Zellman of Ladi, who said, even in the deepest, even in the life of the most deepest believer, the most committed believer, there are moments when you lose God. There are moments when you lose your faith. There are moments when you lose a sense of the meaningfulness of your existence. He said, what do you do in those moments? He said, you go out and do one selfless act.
Yes.
One act of chesed, one act of giving, one act of kindness. And then what happens, he says, is you will feel the presence of God in your own hands. You'll feel the presence of God in your fingers, in the work that you do in the world to heal someone or help someone or teach someone. And that's how you regain a sense of God. Heschel's comment on that was, only through the selfless act can you discover the true nature of the self.
Amen.
Which is a beautiful way to think about it. And that's a wonderful way to think about sacrifice as we read the Torah this morning.
There's a
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Quote I wanted to share at the end here, and
Please.
that is, this is not easy to learn. This is just not learning about sacrifice, learning to give up your own private needs to some degree is not easy, particularly in a culture of selfishness. And there's a passage that Hemingway, of course, my favorite author, wrote, and he wrote this, not about sacrifice, but about stuff the way he always does. Here's what he wrote. There are some things which cannot be learned quickly, and time, which is all we have, must be paid heavily for their acquiring. They are the very simplest things, and because it takes a man's life to know them, the little new that each man gets from life is very costly and the only heritage he has to give.
That's wonderful.
The guy could write.
The guy, boy, could he write. Marc, thank you. A very good Shabbos to you and a very good Shabbos to everyone listening. Take very good care. It's now a couple of weeks before Pesach, so start getting ready.
Next week, we'll do a Pesach thing?
We'll talk Pesach next week. Matzah, maror, charoset, the whole schmear.
I want to know about peanuts. I want to know about
You don't want to know about
green
beans. You don't
beans,
want to know about green beans. There's better things to talk about.
All right.
Take good care, everyone. Shabbat shalom.
Love you. Good Shabbos.